Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of Curiosity. Curiosity is a series where we will explore how to do data differently through conversations with thought leaders and experts from diverse backgrounds. I'm Simone Knight, and I'll be your host along this journey. I'll be joined by Donald Farmer, who each week will meet with two new guests to explore the future of data. In this episode, we'll talk with some of the most curious minds in the field of analytics today. We're going to the data storytellers who share how they get people excited about data and how they use that excitement to create a direct business impact. Our journey of curiosity begins now.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Curiosity. And the title of this episode is also Curiosity and Confidence. And we have some amazing people to join us, Mico and Ben Schein. And of all the episodes in the series, this is the one I'm most worried about. And the reason is, my title is moderator, and I have no idea how I'm going to moderate you guys. But let's see how I do. Now, curiosity and confidence. I would love to start with Mico, but I have to start with Ben because Ben's title is... What's your title, Ben?
Vice President of Data Curiosity.
Vice President of Curiosity. That's quite a title. What do the TPS reports look like for a President of Curiosity?
Whatever I like to do, I think, which is nice.
And how do we get your job?
Yes. Really, it's about how do we change the culture of how data is used in organizations. And that's really a combination of cultural elements as well as tooling elements and how you bring those together. And be intentional about it, because I think you often you can see organizations spending lots of money on tooling and lots of money on culture, and they don't quite click together in a way that actually creates that curiosity, or creates the confidence needed to let curiosity blossom.
Sure. Well, that sounds fascinating. And Mico, what do you do?
Well, after Ben, I don't know what to say. He's Mr. Curiosity. So I'm actually consider myself to be the chief data storyteller of my company, BI Brainz. And so my fascination and passion is helping people to tell amazing stories. So curiosity is built into that, as you could imagine. So it's like making data exciting, really getting into the emotion using storytelling. I love it.
Wow, this is great. I mean, these are two just perfect job titles, curiosity and storytelling. So curiosity is an interesting thing for me. Obviously, it's a subject that I'm very passionate about. But one of the things that we often face when we talk about analytics is many people actually find the subject rather dull, and I think it's because they get the wrong end of it. We get excited about data. A lot of people glaze over when they see data. They look at it and they think, oh, more charts, more endless spreadsheets, more reports. I was joking about the TPS reports, but that's how a lot of people see what comes out of their business intelligence teams and their data teams. So what I'd like to get from you guys is a sense of what excites you. Why are you so excited about this data?
I'll let Ben go first.
You go first. I think what excites me is the potential to actually make change. Right. And so that might mean more profit for a company. It might mean, impact of COVID or changing the way that we live in our world. But I really believe that when data is sort of formed into the right stories, like Mico works on, and can be made in a way that's accessible and lets people be curious, it can change the world. And sometimes that world is the big world, or health, or other things. Sometimes it's the small world of just, how you live your life or how your company is operating. But I think it's really exciting to see how that feels, and how that feels both for the person sort of consuming the data, but also these teams of analysts who have spent many years trying to create curiosity and never having feeling like they're just, like you said, they're just delivering another TPS report. And so seeing that spark on both sides is really exciting for me, and how it changes the way organizations or the world can work.
That's cool. I mean, Mico, in your world, data storytelling and getting people excited about the story, there's a suggestion there, I guess, that, it's not just the data, it's what you do with it that's exciting, yeah? And the need to be able to communicate it. Is that right? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So I was hearing, as I was listening to Ben, what I was thinking about was when you think about impact and storytelling, I think what's exciting, and I tell people this, I say, look, if you have data and you can tell stories, you have a superpower like the Avengers. You can control the narrative, you can control people's emotions and the way they respond to something. You can trigger things like curiosity. So I look at it honestly as like a superpower that you have, that you can literally control this narrative and almost directly influence how people respond to things, right? That's direct impact. That's what gets me. I love the emotion. I love seeing people's face. I love hearing, oh, well, I didn't see that. I'm like, well, now you did. What are you gonna do with it, right? So I love it. I think you have a lot. It's a superpower.
It's fascinating to me that you see it as a way of giving people power and control, because I hear a lot of people when I'm talking to them that they actually feel threatened by data. They actually feel that they'll lose control of the narrative with data because it's all out there and can be more openly discussed. And I think some people hoard the data. We talk about data hoarding and data silos in order precisely to keep control of the narrative. But what you're saying, if I hear you right, is it's the way you present the data, it's the story you tell that is what gives you the control. That's your power.
Yeah, I tell people, don't, getting excited about the data is fine. Get excited about the person's reaction and emotion, what you're influencing. That to me is the exciting part. When you show someone something they didn't know or understand, and you see that light bulb, because you can see it in their face, Donald. There's a light bulb that clicks, and you go, all right, now that you see this, what's next? It's like a hook. And that, for me, it's like an adrenaline rush. I have you on here. Now I'm gonna wheel you in, So I think it's just, again, that's why I say you have a superpower. It's just making sure you use it correctly and obviously don't abuse it.
Well, it's interesting. When you say the phrase "what's next," to my mind, that's the absolute essence of curiosity in data. Is what's next. Ben, what do you think of that? I mean, what is it that stimulates you? What's you've done some really exciting work. So
I think it's interesting in that idea of what's next, and I think we've almost sort of taught people to not ask what's next, right? Or if you are curious, right, and you say like what's next, or ask the next question, and the response is, oh yes, that's interesting, let me put it on the backlog and we'll get back to you in 15 months and then you can look into it. You sort of taught people to not be curious, right? And then we're almost surprised when we're like, there's sort of this attitude of like, just be curious, here's the data, or here it is. And then we're surprised when people don't get excited like that spark, and it's because either there's not meaning to it, or it's so rigid that they can't have that conversation, right? The curiosity is about that conversation. It's about asking what's next. And if my data is so rigid and my tooling is so rigid that when I ask, I'm either told you're not allowed to see that data, or I can't get you that data quickly because the data was rigid or over summarized or whatever, then you push them out. And I think what ends up happening is you rely on sort of the exceptional, right? Everyone knows, like when I worked at Target, like there was always the two buyers that would write macros in Excel, right? And there's always those people, and I often joke that I spent a lot of my time, certainly before I went to BI at Target when I was in finance, just breaking everything. And there's always going to be those people that are going to push the envelope and are going to try to sort of find what's next. If you're relying on just that 5% of people that either have the acumen or the curiosity, you're leaving this whole 95 or 90% of the people out because they're too scared, or they don't have that confidence to go do it because they maybe asked once and were told they're not allowed, or they asked once and were told it would take too long to have that field. And so you just end up with sort of getting by with these exceptional marginal people that will go build the macro and do what it takes, but not really realizing the full potential of your human capital, being curious about the data.
Right. I mean, I think this is important. We'll talk about the confidence. We'll talk about confidence a lot, I think, but also this sense of needing permission. Do I have permission to do this? Um, do you see this, Mico, when people are working with data? Do they have this concern that am I even allowed to do
Oh, all
the
the
kind of
time. I
storytelling?
mean, sometimes when we go through kind of our storytelling and we get to the actions part, it is, you could see people's confidence just go down the drain. You see it in their eyes. So you start, you have a good story and you know what you're measuring, you have your goals, and then you get to the action and they go, I I don't have control over that. the balloon that floats, and you go, well, let's imagine. I always tell them, hey, you know how the business works, though. Let's imagine that you could. What would you do? And they go, well, if it was me, and you could see the hesitation, they're kind of telling you. So the confidence is not even there that I know the business, I probably know the solution. There isn't even a confidence to make a recommendation. It seems sometimes that the culture is, that's not me. So, right. So I agree with Ben in terms of the fact that even the curious people, I feel sometimes the confidence stops at a certain part, in my experience, in the story. And it typically comes when it's time to take action. Action accountability is where it stops.
Right. So I'm going to suggest what I'm hearing here is actually about two different types of confidence. I think what I'm hearing is that there is a sort of cultural organizational confidence. In other words, am I allowed to do this? Is this something I have permission to do, or something that would be effective if I did it? And then there's a sort of personal confidence, which is I can do this. Not just I'm allowed to do it, but I have the capability, I have the techniques, I have the skills, the knowledge, the understanding to do it, which is a little different from the confidence of am I allowed to do it? But actually, when both of these come together, that's when we get the confidence that I think we're talking about, yeah?
Success. I agree.
Ben,
I think,
this...
go ahead.
Sorry, please, yeah, go on.
You say that some of the dynamic I think you see is that people expect, that tools will solve those problems, right? It's like, oh, here's my magic set of beans that will make everyone, right? Or that will do that. And tools certainly play a fun look. I work for a software vendor, and so I do believe in the power of tools, but ultimately, like, the tools without that broader cultural context and the confidence and those sort of changes in how you empower people, that's what really lights it all on fire, right? It's not just just having some magic tool. It has to be the combination.
I think the tools have to provide support for that kind of confidence. They have to be there, and they also have to provide support for the organizational confidence as well. So it's the tool that works for the organization and the individual. I think when those two come together, you get that. But I do tend to agree that in a sense, tools can get in the way negatively. It's very easy for a tool to get in the way and destroy your confidence or prevent you from doing things. But people who've got that confidence, people who've got that skill, often manage. You were saying, the person who writes Excel macros, they can often manage with almost anything, in some ways as well. So, but Mico, you're very focused on helping people to gain that confidence. You train people in getting that confidence, yeah?
Yeah, I do. And one of the areas,
so it's a trainable skill.
Yeah, what we focus on is what I found when it comes to like confidence and curiosity is there's a dialogue going on in people's head, Donald. And a lot of times they're somehow questioning, are they asking the right questions? It's like an insert.
I have lots of dialogues going on in my head. But
yeah, right. But more importantly, what's going on in their head oftentimes doesn't come through their mouth. There's a barrier.
Oh, right? I see what you mean.
Yeah. Right. So they have a dialogue. It might be the right dialogue, granted, but there's that confidence that I feel like it's a blockage where they know it, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not sure. So there's something that happens there where I feel like so we teach people about asking the right questions because we feel that once we get them to open their mouths and they have confidence that what they're asking is correct, they themselves feel better about what they're doing. That's a big part of the focus. That's why we teach people what to say, what to ask. And then
I got to ask you this. We're in the middle of this crisis just now. Okay, so we're in the middle of the COVID crisis. We're all working remotely. Would you like to tell us where you're working from, Mico?
After I changed my background, yes, I'm in the Caribbean where I'm from. I'm in Jamaica.
Yeah, and I'm in sunny Seattle. And Ben, where are you?
I'm in sunny Minnesota.
There we go, sunny Minnesota. So we're actually all very widely distributed. And I'm not saying that just because we all want to be jealous of Mico working from the Caribbean. There is an important point here, which is you were saying that there's some people who don't have that confidence to speak up, who are engaged with the data, but they're sort of held back by the dynamics, by the team dynamics, by the organizational dynamics. They know what they want to say. They have it going on in their head, but they don't come out with it. Has that changed? Has that changed now that we're all working remotely? Now that we're all on Zoom? Now that we're all, we're not in the room with each other. There's no loudest voice in the room anymore. The interpersonal dynamics have kind of very subtly, well, maybe not subtly at all, maybe dramatically
That
altered.
I think so. So I'll start there. So there's two things I think that have helped this a lot, and this is just based on my experience. One is the fact that you now have this chat in the meetings, and I noticed that a lot of people who may not have talked before, because they're so accustomed to texting, they're very verbal in the chat. So they may not be yapping, but the chats are just like, whoa, there's some good stuff in the chat, right? That you normally in a conference room wouldn't get, right? And then I think on the camera, especially if you're looking at people, I think you definitely, at least for me, I'm very big on watching people's reaction and eyes. I think that you don't have the intimidation anymore. So what I say by this, I'm, fairly shorter female, and so I'm not intimidated, but one can be intimidated by someone who's tall or someone who's a little bit bigger. It happens, right? Or they look differently. One of the things that happened here is it levels the playing field. All we have is a basic headshot with some shoulders. And I think that not all of you are the same size right now. And I think that not having that dynamic of being in the room and being in the back of the room, and pe- people talk, they're talking up.
That's why I
That's
grew
fascinating.
beard. It's more intimidation.
I like it. Yeah, so we're definitely seeing it, Donald. And it's a very different dynamic from a conference room where, Miko's in the back and, Ben's in the front, Donald's in the corner, and then we got a big boss in the, like it's a dynamic. That online, it's leveled out.
Right, yeah. Are you
I like
seeing that,
that.
Ben? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely changing sort of, both how you guide the meeting with data, right? So I think having that sort of shared source of truth, and not whether, even if you were past handouts and stuff, but just knowing you need to sort of have a place where the data can come together. That's not location based. It's not server based. Even that's really about the cloud. I think that does. I do think that there is something lost from sort of the proximity of being able to just ask that question. So I think it's making sure you have those channels, whether it's the chat in Zoom, or Slack or texting or whatever it is, because I think you don't want to lose that just swinging by someone's desk, because sometimes that's where the confidence comes from. Like, oh, I think this is right, but I just want someone to see that, right? So I think I've noticed more and more people even using like the direct call feature in Zoom with the video, where like,
Yeah.
let's just, because it becomes one of your tools, you have to use it. Maybe at first people were like, well, I don't have that desk or that person to walk by, but now if I know how to use this tool, I can say, let's just hop on a call and look at this query together, or can you give me that validation? Because I do think peer validation and sort of peer review is a piece of that confidence, right? Of knowing that you have that second set of eyes or that review process. So I think it's important to make sure we create those venues electronically when we're not there in person, and obviously beforehand. But I think making sure you're cognizant of it is can be really important to how you drive the conversation forward.
Some years ago, I did some research on the retention of information that was exchanged during meetings, and part of what we did was had people in conference rooms with a shared screen, and they could talk to the screen, and the screen was there showing data of various sorts, and we would come back later and ask them questions about what did they see and what decisions were made in the data and in the meeting, and what data was used. And we replaced that with two other types of environment. They had exactly the same data and information, but they had it on iPads and touchscreens in front of them. And then on the other hand, they had a large monitor as well, but it was a touchscreen monitor, and people could go and interact with it. And we found that the retention of the information was far greater with the personal interaction with the data. So long as they could personally interact with it, they followed the meeting better, they followed the data better, they understood the decisions better. The very passive big screen with however good the dashboard was that was on the screen was actually very impersonal, and they were very unengaged with that.
It's interesting, Donald. It's actually one of the reasons, and I sometimes get pushback from cheap companies, no big company names called, where I demand that when we're doing executive level, I require buying iPads. If they don't have it, we're either taking their iPads or upgrading them, and we literally place them in the seats before they walk in, and it's just there. And I've had, CFOs go, "What? 10,000 on what, Miko Yuck?" I'm like, "You hired us. You need to trust me." I said, "These guys have ADD from birth. That's how they got to this role. right? And these women. And so we literally will, when they walk in, it's there. And before we start talking, they start going. I didn't even know your staff, but it's a tactic we've used all along, and it works really well. They start engaging.
It is engaging, and there's something particular about the touch interface that draws people in. It is very, very natural. The what do you think of that, Ben? The kind of role of experience, of the user experience in the broadest sense, in curiosity and confidence. Is that something that you pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need people to engage. I think you also it creates some of the transparency, right? So we talked before about people who maybe are scared and then they want to hide the data, right? I feel like when people used to print things out in person, like they hold up some spreadsheet and say, "Here's the metric." You email me that, and they say, "Yeah." And then 2 weeks later, you're like, "Oh yeah, I'll email." It never comes. So I think there is that transparency. I also find, I think there is something, whether it's physical or even in terms of latency, of being connected to the data, right? I have had many debates over the year about real-time data, and people or IT or whoever will say, well, you don't need the data real time. And they might be right? The CEO of a retailer is not going to make a decision with the data in real time. But what I worry about is like, what does that do to the culture and to the overall curiosity when once a month or once a quarter is when they consume data, right? So as long as they're responsible, right, which is the word we haven't, like, it's you have to be responsible when you get that curiosity, because I can't be the CEO calling up someone every time something looks bad on the dashboard. But if I'm responsible with it, I have this sort of feed of data that's my connection to my customers. And it sort of changes. It doesn't mean I'm making a decision with it every time. That's not the appropriate thing, but it changes the way data sort of flows through an organization. And I think that's some of that emotion. It's the touch, it's the feel, it's that frequency of knowing what's going on. And when you need it, then you have it.
Yeah, I am. Donald, can I add something quick to that?
Please,
So
yes, yeah.
one of the hacks that we teach is, this sounds really bad, I know, I'm a millennial, is we use Facebook's neurological programming and the need, and also Apple. So years ago, I was teaching this when iPhone came out and Facebook, that little red number dot, people just cannot, when they see a red circle, we are neurologically programmed to click. I literally tell them, build this into your interface if you can, or make it happen, because you don't have to redo the work. We just, even on your phone, you see a red dot, Facebook has done the work. We neurologically have to see what's there. And so I actually tell a lot of our customers and students, let us work on their neurological programming and drive curiosity to where they just can't help themselves. Why is it number 2? Why is there 4 notifications? So that's a little bit of hack we've been using for a long time before it was even available.
The dot in the message when someone's typing, right? It's like, that's
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
what's next?
What's
right.
next?
What's next?
That's the question. What's next? And actually, one of the most interesting things that I've found in recent years is the change from, I did a lot of work on recommender systems and recommendation algorithms.
Oh,
and, kind of fascinating. We're all familiar with them from the Netflix and the Amazon and so on. Netflix offers you what it thinks you might want to watch. Amazon tells you what other people have bought. But what's been really interesting, and actually both of those experiences, but many other recommendation experiences as well, has been that rather than having a superpowered algorithm, they actually create a user experience which encourages you to explore what's next. It doesn't just recommend something to you, it actually gives you, Netflix goes straight on to the next movie.
Right.
And you're already hooked, and there's an impedance to switching it off. Very often you'll just sit there and carry on watching it. And Amazon does something similar, and other online retail experiences do something similar. This question of kind of almost like neurological programming of the user to be more engaged is super interesting, I think. And in a sense, what you're doing, you're piquing their curiosity, yeah?
And even showing in analytics where you can now show what more people looked at, that type of, we just can't help ourselves. Why is that report looked at 50,000 times? Those are, why is that one not looked at all? Right. And so I think those type of little triggers that people already have, we actually teach our students and clients, use them, build them in. It'll drive curiosity, because we're already programmed to wonder why is there 50,000 clicks on this thing? I don't get it. It just looks like sales. You know what? Let me go and look.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, let me ask you this. At an enterprise, which is, the one thing about an enterprise that we can say about almost any enterprise is that it's the range in the hierarchy between the C-suite and the operational worker is fairly dramatic. That's the nature of an enterprise, large corporation with a large number of people. Is curiosity different for the executive than it is for the operational, the person on the shop floor, the salesperson? Is the executive, does he have a different kind of curiosity from the operational worker?
Working a lot with executive and board members, they're always just curious who they need to shoot. I know that came up very blunt, but they literally are like, they want to get as quickly as they can to who they need to call. That has been my personal experience.
Right, yeah.
On the lower level, they are curious enough to not want to get that call. So the minute they want to get ahead. So I often hear stuff like, hey, if my supervisor is going to get this at 8, I need it at 5. Right? Because what they're trying to do is be proactive and preventative. So I think it is a different level based on where they are. That's just been my experience. And I know it so well that I come in and I go, all right, they're getting this report on Monday. Did you want to get it on Sunday? And the absolute answer would be absolutely yes. I do not want that call on Monday morning. So I see this too, it's driving some reactive or proactive behavior, and curiosity is there because they're gonna get in, they're gonna get to it before someone does it, or they want to just figure out quickly who do I need to get to.
Super interesting. Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
I think a lot of it at the leader level, some of it's about knowing what not to talk about, right? Because especially with meetings, we get into this, okay, every VP is going to talk. Well, you know what? If everything's fine, I don't need to talk to these 3. I want to focus on these 2 where we have something to talk about. And so I think that sort of, as you get higher up, that becomes more important because your time only gets more precious, and it doesn't. The one thing that doesn't expand as you go up, your salary expands, your team, other things, your time stays the same. But I do think what I've seen is sometimes it's valuable, like the framework that you can set up at that top level can then help reinforce a framework all the way down, right? So it doesn't mean that the curiosity is exactly the same, the level of granularity, but if this is how the CEO and the EVPs are looking at it, then each VP can look at it in a similar way, again, at a more granular level, because it might be for that VP, there is something that's wasn't big enough to spike for the CEO to talk about it, but something for them to talk about, and so on. And then there is, again, like this is where I end up in fights with engineers and other people of like, well, you don't really need that data. Or let's just summarize it for the executive so they can have it, and then it's going to be different. There's both something functional about having it all connected, but also emotional and cultural about knowing that what's happening way down here with people making decisions is the same data that the CEO is looking at. And again, the CEO is making the same kind of decisions or being curious in the same way, because if they are, it's a waste of their time, and it's also dangerous and can have negative impacts on the people down below. But that connectivity is something that I don't think you can measure in terms of people feeling like they're all sort of rallying around the same metrics. And look, yes, maybe if you summarize it or separate it, you can sort of control for it until you and something doesn't match and you have teams going in 2 different directions. And it comes up and that doesn't feel right either, right? That disincentivizes curiosity because like, well, why am I working on this? This is not what the CEO is looking at. They're looking at a different number and it doesn't matter what's going on.
Right. So the incentive for curiosity there is actually to, how can I best fulfill a shared goal or a common goal, or for that matter, a hierarchical goal? How can I do my job better? I'm really interested in another sort of type of curiosity, which is a curiosity for curiosity's sake. There's a lot of people I find very curious about data. I just love digging into data, and I always find myself having more questions to ask. There is value in that kind of curiosity. And one of the things that's valuable about that is that exploration. It trains you. It trains you in data exploration. So we're right now in a crisis. And that crisis happened with extraordinary rapidity. Happened almost overnight. In fact, it kind of grew gradually, but there's nevertheless, we almost literally woke up and found ourselves in a crisis that we hadn't expected. And those people, those organizations, those enterprises who hadn't already developed the skills of curiosity it's very late now for them to start developing those skills, don't you think?
I agree 100%. I mean, not that anything's ever too late. I'm an optimist, but I agree with you that if right now it's because there's so much other emotion and overwhelming involved. That's part of what it is, right? That people want people want results. They
Yeah.
want you to get to it and get to it faster, quicker, more direct. So I agree with you that no, it's crunch time. You'd hope that curiosity was already there.
And people are curious about, the results. They're also curious about the process.
That's right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of research. There's a great Harvard Business Review article about the business case for curiosity. And one of the big
Yeah.
concepts we talked about there was the idea of intellectual humility, right? I think that's some of what like you captured, Donald. Of right, if I'm not intellectual, if I don't have all this intellectual hubris, right? If I am willing to learn, I'm willing to explore, to know the limits of what I know. That has huge implications for how you learn as an organization. Um, and how you can accept a big change like COVID, right? Because you're not so set that this is the only way, that it must be 10 columns and these 5 rows, and that's the only way to look at the data, even if the whole world has changed, right? And so, yes, it has applications for data, but I always would say that too, that I mean, forget about data. Like, if people are curious, the whole organization is at risk because you're not going to be exploring and learning and iterating as an organization.
That's and one of the things. Well, you know this, Ben, because we've talked about this, and I'll use this illustration of my kitten, who I think since the last time we spoke, my kitten's no longer a kitten. I think she's now
Yeah,
officially a
yeah,
cat. But when she was a kitten and when she was beginning to explore, she was, as cats are, very, very curious, and that's her nature. But what was really interesting was that as she explored her environment, she started climbing trees. She started kind of burrowing along any tunnel that she saw, that sort of thing, and she started to learn how to come back down a tree, how to come back along a tunnel, how to defend herself, for example. And as a result, she got more confidence, which in turn made her even more curious. Now, every tree is fascinating because she can get up and back down again. And so you end up with this virtuous cycle, I think, of curiosity and confidence. Confidence gives you more curiosity. Curiosity gives you more confidence. And I sometimes wonder, as we look at the world of analytics, and as a trainer, Mico, I wonder if you see this, that these two things go together, that if we can give people more confidence in for example, the data storytelling, that in your expertise, do you then make them more curious because they have more confidence?
So I think it depends, and let me say why. I've learned and I've trained, over 10,000 students. I feel like curiosity is something that people learn from birth, and I almost feel sometimes they either retain it or they don't. So let me give you a good example. One of the exercises we do in our trainings is one of the questions when you do your intro is tell someone something interesting about yourself. And I always know who the curious people are. And I don't mean to say this in a mean way. It's always, oh, on the weekends, I jump out of a plane, or I play a guitar. I do it every week and I swim with sharks, right? I can always kind of tell, unfortunately, quickly that this is going to be the person asking slightly different questions and going and looking at it a different way and ask, just a different view versus someone, and it's not a bad thing, who may be a bit more narrow minded. And then when I dig into my students a lot deeper, I tend to find that the environment they grew up in, where they were, whatever they were exposed to, they were encouraged, like I was, to be curious about everything. It's like I always tell people, I said, with this stuff, for instance, happening with BLM, people ask me, how are you affected? I go, my parents never told me I was a box. They never told me I was Black, I was Asian. I didn't know. All I knew, I was human. And it was probably the best thing they did because I didn't see a box. I didn't know there was one. And I think that growing up with that level of like just the world's your oyster, I see those people asking different questions. And then I check other people who are kind of quiet, I'm not seeing evolving. And I can always kind of tell that there's a box there, like someone put a box over them, Donald. So I don't know if it always goes hand in hand, because sometimes those people build confidence and they ask slightly more questions, but I don't know sometimes if I see the level of curiosity that one would expect. That's just been my experience.
Ben, you work with executives, and if I think of Mico and her the people that she sees in the box, I know I might have this completely wrong, but it strikes me that it would be really difficult to be a leader in any organization if you're stuck in that box. I mean, surely curiosity is an essential leadership trait, or Or am I wrong? Are there leaders who are not particularly curious?
I think there's always exceptions to the
I was
rule.
gonna say.
Right?
No names, but
And that happens. But I do think you're right. But I think even if that's the case, you also have to be cognizant of the blockers you put up for other people's curiosity or the confidence they need for curiosity, right? So I think to Mico's point, like there is variability in everyone's background and innate curiosity and those things. And so um, as a leader, you have to think about how do I can't make everyone as some people are going to be more curious than others, right? But what am I doing that's blocking them, or maybe disincentivizing that curiosity? Because I think you're right. Ultimately, if you got to a place of leadership, it was hopefully because you thought a little bit outside of that box, or you thought more creatively or more curious. But often it's also easy to forget, right? Because you also you do that but then you get set and like, well, this is how I did it, right? And then I'm not, or it could just be subconscious, right? That I don't realize that every time either you shoot someone down or when you refuse to invest in technology or to think differently about how you empower people, that you're essentially blocking them. I think also like you can become, when you become a leader, like there's more risk, right? And then you become risk, right? And certainly, I mean, look, everything from Enron on, right? You can look at like there is legitimate risk and there's ethics and all those things, but I think sometimes we let those sort of extreme cases sort of dictate everything else, right? Just because some data is very sensitive and needs to be governed and locked down, does not mean that all data needs to be that way or that that's the best solution. And if you're overly risk averse at a certain level because of all you have to lose, sometimes that I think can also end up stifling curiosity in the name of good governance, which no one's advocating bad governance, but I think there's a
no, I don't understand what you mean. I think this balance between risk and curiosity in analytics in particular, because we're dealing with data, is very critical. So Mico, you must come across this. I mean, people who say, well, I would love to be telling data stories, I'd love to be doing this analysis, but I'm not allowed to have the data, or I don't get the data.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting. I had that happen in our last workshop, where we had a very big company and their team was in our workshop, and the leader literally, I saw a light bulb go off because we're all on camera. It's like a gazillion people on camera, and I could see her face, and I'm like, hey, you have an idea? Because I turned off the record and I said, this is we have a safe spot for our trainings where you can talk whatever you want. No one, so it's like a code of secrecy. And she said, no, there's something, there's a use case here I'd like to touch. If I just get my hands on the data, like I know what I could do, and you could see it. And I said, well, why can't you get it? She said, oh, she said, we get all the complaints, but we don't have access to fix it. Right. And so we do see that too, and I think there's a lack of confidence where someone like that has the solution and won't, probably didn't even go back to work and talk up.
Right, yeah. How can you help people beyond that barrier? I mean, obviously there's an organizational thing which has to happen to enable her, but is there anything you can do, anything you can advise her to do that helps to
Sure.
fix
So
this?
what I recommended to her was, I said, well, one thing you could do first of all is see if there's any examples online of companies that have shared similar use cases. See if someone did it. I mean, everything's been tried. We all know that. There's nothing new, right? Dale Carnegie book has been written over 15 million times by the new guru. Tony Robbins is our Dale Carnegie or whatever, right? And then there'll be another one. And so I said to her, check to see if there's something similar in a use case. And then I said, maybe bridge the conversation, right? Not with the data owner, with the person who's going to benefit, with the person who is WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. If you bridge a discussion with them and they want it, they will get you the data.
Right.
Forget the person with the chains.
Interesting. Kind of reciprocity in there.
Yeah, wrong. I said again, and that's where we talk about stories. And I talked to her about, in that person, if you figure out what they want, tell the story and paint that vision for them. Make them want it. And when they want it, believe me, that gatekeeper is dead in the water.
Well, I love the fact that you said gatekeeper because, well,
Yeah.
you know where I'm going to go with this, but I often have this saying that I use that in the IT world, we have to change our mindset from being gatekeepers to shopkeepers. That it's no longer enough to say we're protecting the data. It's ours. We have the metaphor with data access. We'll give you access. We'll open the door a little and let you in. We actually have to become more like shopkeepers and say, we want you to use our data. We've prepared it for you. We've packaged it. We've made it available. We're advertising it to
I
you.
love that.
I think this is a very important change.
We'll give you a 2-for-1 offer, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you run across this, Ben? I mean, you must, even at executive level, people must be in enterprises frustrated by the inability to get to data.
For sure. And I think, some of it is, sometimes I think there's a false sense of security, right? So like the gatekeeper or the person that is risk averse thinks that they're maintaining this really secure place, but really they're pushing a lot of that, the curiosity that does exist, which might just be in this marginal population that's still willing to scrap the data together. It's happening outside of any form of governance or visibility. So I'd rather have them have a place where maybe I give them a little more power, but then I can monitor, not in the big brother kind of way, but in the kind of way like we were talking about of like what's being used, what's effective. The CEO looking at this, is it either incorrect or is it correct? And we should be using it more often to drive good decisions because it's a good way to approach or to tell the story about this data. But I think, often look, people, either because of how they were sort of, mandated, right? Their role was mandated to be more of this gatekeeper, or even how they're incented, right? So when I hear people talking about, oh, I have this frustration, I'm like, well, okay, well, let's flip it a little bit. Where's your empathy? Like, or how are they being incented, right? Are they incented to minimize the query length? How long it takes for a query? Was there a legitimate reason for that? Probably. So like start with that. Say, I'm aware that you're really trying to maximize our uptime. I mean, that's important to you. Can we run a test to see if you expose more of this data? Can we still stay within the limits that you've set? So then it becomes less about a challenge to sort of their world order and even their incentive structure, and more of
the world order. I love that.
Who acknowledges what it's like and then tries to help. But it doesn't mean it always works. Like they might run it and say it's too much, and then you have a debate about it. But I think too often we sort of put on our blinders, and there's sort of like the classic, right? The personas of like IT just not responding at all, and then the business just complaining. And how do you sort of find a place to meet in the middle and be more empathetic about both sides?
Well, I think having, your term incentives is absolutely right. IT tend not to. I mean, they tend not to share. They have this tendency to be gatekeepers because that's what they've been incented to do. Literally, they don't have incentives to share. In fact, very often it's the other way around. Their incentives are to prevent bad things happening rather than to enable good things. And the negative incentive is stronger than the positive incentive. I would love to see how do we structure incentives for analytics? What would they look like? Incentives for curiosity.
We could pay by the question you ask, right?
I would love that. I was gonna say I'm gonna start with questions. I think that if you are going to incentivize people to be curious about their data, I think it has to start with the questions. And I think those questions then have to, we rally around reports. I think we need people to rally around questions, almost like a Quora analytics.
Right. Yeah.
What a great question, and then people kind of throw in data at it, and the conversation evolves almost like a Facebook post. That's what I think. That would be a dream in my world.
There was an enterprise I did some work with at one point, and they had a team of about 50 business analysts doing kind of various forms of business intelligence and some machine learning as well. And they had two whiteboards in the kind of office space where the analysts sat. And one of the whiteboards, they would write up the most important discoveries that have been made in terms of dollar savings or dollars earned. So what was the financial impact of this discovery? And you could be on that board, and if you were on that board, there was a kind of incentive. And it wasn't much at the end of the month, you got a little prize or something. But people wanted to be on that board. But there was another board, and the other board was coolest discovery. And didn't matter what the money was. Everybody wanted to be on the cool board.
Yeah.
It was okay. I could save $1 million over here, but get me on the cool board. That's where they wanted to be.
It's the branding, man, the words. It's the, Donna, I was gonna say one thing on your last thought before you went. One of the exercises we do, and I think you see me do it, is we tell people to draw a single picture for a word. Have you ever seen me do that exercise?
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, that was fantastic. You did that in South Africa when we were there. That was
Did I do
so
governance
impressive.
by any chance? Okay, so did you happen to see when I did governance that there was a picture? One of the users drew a picture of being lynched on a wall.
I
The
saw that. Yeah.
other one drew chains, shackled with a big lock. The other one, yeah, the other one did a gravel. These were literally, I said, draw one picture, and the first one that comes to mind. And I have to tell you, I like, wow, that's like hangman. It's talking about killing curiosity in its tracks.
Well, that's there's that psychology of it as well. Corporate governance feels very threatening. So Ben, in your role, encouraging curiosity or delving into curiosity,
I love it.
how do you balance curiosity and governance?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just in the words you choose sometimes can be important, right? So even how it can be the same outcome, but how do you frame it, right? How do you frame?
Sorry.
Yeah, how do you tell the story, and how do you frame it in terms of, I want governance to be a force that makes you feel more confident, right? So I can feel like because of good governance, I won't do anything that will mess anything up too much. Because of good
It's
governance,
like the
I will,
kitten. I can come back down the tree, so it's safe for me
yeah,
to go up.
yeah, I won't look at data that I'm not allowed to. I don't have to worry about looking at bad data because I have good governance in place, as opposed to, oh, I have governance in place and it's the being chained, it's pushing me out and telling me no. And some of it goes back to like sort of that equality of doing that, and also using governance. It's not just. I think I often have these debates. Sometimes it's about security, but governance can also be about content management and discovery and making things relevant, right? So a lot of times we go straight to just the security implication of governance, but but it also could be things like, yes, I'm allowed to see all this data, but I want to see what's relevant, right? Or
Right.
I'm allowed to see all, like, even using the data, like I'm allowed to see all the cards that everyone has seen, but I want to see what people under my same VP has seen because we have like-minded goals and like-minded job. And
Smart.
I want that to be the sort of useful line that I draw as opposed to this restrictive line. But too often we go either way, and then you lose that curiosity because, well, I want to start here. I might now have a problem that requires me to go outside this bound. And if I thought about it as this very strict security thing, I'm stuck there. If I thought about it as like a starting place or somehow to guide me, I still have the right to go out there. And so, I think it's about balancing those and framing it as a way that it solves business problems, right? It's like, because
Yeah.
yeah,
It does. I often have to remind my clients that governance is not about making the right decision. It's about making the decision in the right way. You can have a well governed bad decision. It doesn't guarantee better decision. You would hope that good governance helps in making good decisions, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is to make the decision in the right way. And there's another category of problem, which is making the right decision. But I mean this in a positive way, in the sense that it frees you up to be curious because you have the layer of governance that, if you like, protects you from that. Do you come across this, Mico? I mean, it must be a challenge when you have people who are now enthusiastic data storytellers and they want to dig into all the data they possibly can. Are there times in your work where the restraints are actually positive, where maybe we just need to be more cautious in this area?
Admittedly, there's very few times in between. Governance does not ring a big bell, and I do that visual, so I see the visuals. I will say that I also do the reframing similar, and what I tell them, and Donna, we've talked about this, is I say, let's think about safety instead. But I remember you kind of cornered me and told me, well, it's not just about safety, but I actually try to repaint that picture over and say, remember, governance is to keep you safe, quote unquote, protect you. And if you think about it like that, you have the realm to do anything. And then you have the crime of omission. you know, you said, I told them, I said, think of it. And I go back to superpowers. I say, you have good governance, you have a superpower. You could say, I didn't know. I say, and trust me, omission is also a superpower. So I try to reframe it to where I tell them, it's great to be omissive because you can do whatever you want. And if it broke, you're like, Ben, you told me it was governed. How did it happen? So I actually keep that. That's a real tactic I use where I repaint that picture in the brain and I say, so let's go. Don't let it stop you.
Yeah. I sometimes try to turn their thinking around because I hear people saying like governance is like a safety net. If I fall, well, the data's well governed. And I sometimes want to say to them, well, think of it the other way. It's not about a safety net, it's more like a foundation. It's what you build on. And therefore you can build with more confidence and build something that is, if you like, more elaborate or more complex because you can do that.
I like that analogy because it's also like the safety net can also, I mean, I guess it depends where it's at, but it could stop you from growing, right? Or from going farther. You don't want it to be this restrictive force. You want it to be the foundation that lets you sort of explore and be curious and do new things, not something that maybe is hindering your organization, right?
That's what I would kind of hope we could get to. So as we look back, I mean, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I
I
think
know, this is great.
yeah, we covered so many areas, and I'd like to get to this point of how do we help people? How do we help people to be confident? I mean, I think the enterprise folks who are listening to this are going to be probably, I suspect they have two things at the back of their mind. One is, yeah, sure, we want to go out and do this. We would love to be more curious and more confident. They're still going to have this question about governance in the background. Well, they don't understand the complexity of my situation and or whatever. But I wonder if there's, how do we encourage them, people who are listening to this to this podcast, how do we encourage them to be more curious themselves, but also to engage more curiosity across their entire organization?
I think, as you say it, and as I think back on it, I think one of the big lessons piece of advice I would say is patience, right? Like this confidence and this curiosity, it's not too often people just think, here it is. Whether it's I'm done with the report or, I've stated the policy or I have governance in place. It takes work, right? And it takes iteration and it takes working at it together. And so just having that patience to keep on doing it, knowing that it will be the right thing for the organization in the long term, but that you can't expect it to be a one and done or to just be a one-time conversation. It has to be an ongoing, patient journey you take people on to help them with that curiosity and give them that confidence around curiosity. And so if I had to think of one thing, it's cliche, but just be patient with it. You can't just expect it to be.
Well, I mean, patience is super important here, isn't it? Because you're not going to change it overnight. And we were talking about incentives, and clearly we're trying to incent the right thing. And just as you were talking, I was remembering that I was talking about my kitten earlier, and just before we started recording, you were talking about your puppy. You have a new puppy, yeah? And I know it's kind of adorable, and but the difference between a puppy and a kitten is with a kitten, you are delighted by its curiosity and you're delighted by the fact that it grows more confident and more curious and ends up going up trees and doing things. It's the last thing you want with a puppy. We actually train our puppies to be, restrained, to walk on leashes, to be well governed. And we encourage our kittens to be curious and confident. And I wonder if that's, what are we trying to do in our organizations, Mico? Are we training puppies or training kittens?
I think we're training puppies.
What should we be training, Mico?
Right. If I had to admit, I think we're definitely training puppies. You might be training hamsters because they sit in a cage.
Yeah.
You don't want them to get away because we're afraid.
They're running on a wheel, right?
Running on a wheel, yeah.
So I think we're training hamsters, which is a lot worse because even dogs get a walk. We don't walk the hamster, right? I think we're training. So I want to answer your question really quick. I know that we're wrapping up here. So I think based on my experience, one of the best ways to encourage curiosity and confidence is by leading by example. I cannot tell you, Donald, I'm like high energy. I don't even drink caffeine, but there's something plugged into my system. I'm not sure. And I can't tell you how many times I have people that leave our training and they literally say, I'm taking the Mico high and I'm going forward. Because I tell them, I always make a joke. I say, look, Monday's going to come. Corporate's going to hit. The real world's gonna come, and I don't want you guys to lose a sparkle. And I hear people say, no, I'm not gonna let it happen. I'm gonna take, and I think that leading by example is probably one of the first ways to do it. And I always tell leaders, like, because I work, with C-level, I said, listen, just like how everybody could read Eric Ries's Lean Startup and teach people how to fail fast, we can teach them how to be curious as well. Right. Fail fast is a known term now. Please go in and fail because the one time you hit, we're going to hit $1 trillion. And I think if we went with that same approach toward it and we encourage that in that way, people would be more curious. So those are kind of my two.
I got to go back to Ben because I wonder what he thinks of that. That sounds, fail fast. Is that part of the analogy we should be using, Ben?
No, I mean, I think it is a big part of, right. People need to feel like it's okay to try and to fail, and that it's not going to be the end of the world, right? And
Confidence.
yeah, whether that means they're not going to break the dashboard, or they're not going to break the data, or they're going to, be able to test and learn something new. And I think that goes for everything. Like, I personally, again, use data. Like, if the debate's about governance, if the debate is about, processing time or whatever,
You
um,
know,
let data help you guide that. Let the outcome and what we're trying to prove with the data guide all your decisions. And then I think you end up in a much um, better place. Because if you just say fail, I mean, you don't want. I mean, you want to learn from your failures too, right? So hopefully,
Sure, absolutely.
data
I
comes
mean,
in.
there is. I mean, failure is very important. When I was a VP of innovation, my labs team came to me and said, "Hey, look at all the projects we've run and how successful they were." And I said, "Well, yeah, no bonus for you then, because all your projects succeeded. We're supposed to be innovating. If we're not failing, we're not trying hard enough." Right? They did get a bonus. So I'm not that cruel, but still, I mean, my point, I hope, was a good one. That innovation involves some sort of risk. It involves the curiosity. It involves the confidence.
but Thomas Edison, right? Sorry, I hate to
Yeah.
interrupt, but he said, they said, you failed 1,000 times. You know the story. And he said, no, I didn't. I learned 1,000 ways not to build a light bulb.
That is actually very cool. Yeah. I think this has been just a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. It's we've hit on something I think really important, which is that curiosity is something that matters at every level of the organization, and it's not just executive curiosity. It's not just particular roles that need to be curious. There's a role for curiosity throughout the company. If we can build the incentives that reward curiosity, if we can build a foundation that supports curiosity, and a large part of that is this interplay between the curiosity and confidence. I want to thank you guys so much. It's been, I said, I didn't think I'd be able to moderate you, and I don't think I managed, but it has been a wonderful conversation, and we've gone some really interesting places. Thank you so much for joining us. Be safe, be well, and I hope everyone else has enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you.
In this episode, we learned that both organizational and personal confidence are critical to fostering curiosity. Innovation requires risk, so people need to know that it's okay to fail and then learn. I encourage you to take the next 3 steps. 1, start asking questions. 2, build incentives to reward curious behavior. And 3, encourage people to play with the data to discover what's next. On behalf of Donald and I, we invite you to follow along as we continue our journey of curiosity. Don't forget to subscribe to the series. You won't want to miss episode 5, Analytics is Not Enough, where we'll explore the symbiotic relationship between humans and AI. So join us next week. And remember, stay curious.